Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever been working on something with a team? Maybe it's a group project at school or a large project at work. Often there will be someone who isn't doing their fair share or just isn't capable of keeping up with the rest of the team. When that happens, you might say that person cannot cut the mustard.
This one, okay, I'm ready for it. Just, is it mustard? Actual, like ketchup and mustard?
According to the Oxford English Dictionary, cut the mustard means, quote, to come up to expectations, to meet requirements, to succeed, end quote. The Oxford English Dictionary does go on to note that the phrase is frequently used in negative contexts, meaning someone is unable to cut the mustard or they are not cutting the mustard, which is the example I gave in the opening piece. But we will see several examples as well where it is used in the positive. So it is not always used negative, but it does seem to be frequently used that way because someone is not cutting the mustard or not able to do that.
Right.
Okay. I know what you're thinking. Shauna, you've just mentioned it. I know the rest of you are thinking this too. Why would cutting a yellow liquid condiment mean meeting expectations? Well, the Oxford English Dictionary notes the phrase may allude to the difficulty of cutting tall mustard plants during harvest. It also notes that there is another interpretation where the word may have originally been muster, meaning to assemble or collect.
Right.
Now, in this case, it would have likely come from pass muster, which is a military expression meaning to pass inspection. And while the two phrases do have a similar meaning, the Oxford English Dictionary notes there's no current evidence linking pass muster to the word cut, nor does the phrase cut the muster or even cut muster make much sense without a connection through the word cut. The other piece here that pushes the Oxford English Dictionary to say it's cutting tall mustard plants is that mustard was already a popular subject of older phrases, such as hot as mustard or strong as mustard, meaning powerful or passionate, and keen as mustard, meaning enthusiastic. So it does seem more likely that the phrase comes from the mustard plant itself. So yes, it does come from like the condiment,
like
but it's the plant.
Okay.
Yes, from mustard.
Well,
yes.
At least that I could see, making some sense because I'm like, or maybe, if it is the liquid, it's like, man, he can't even cut the mustard.
Right. And I didn't look into the history behind hot as mustard or strong as mustard, meaning powerful or passionate. And I also didn't look into keen as mustard, meaning enthusiastic. But the fact that those were phrases, now mostly archaic, but the fact that those were phrases in the late 1700s and early 1800s gives more credence to cut the mustard, making a lot more sense coming into a phrase because you already had mustard being used as something that has been harvested for a very long time. And we're going to talk more about the history of mustard in our behind the scenes, which you can join us Friday on Patreon. We'll talk more on the history of this plant and its spread. And our behind-the-scenes video for each episode is available on our Patreon every Friday at patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. The first attestations are from the mid-1880s. The Oxford English Dictionary notes that the Burden Enterprise out of Kansas, dated August 14th, 1884, is one of the first places that they found it. The Burden Enterprise is out of Burden, Kansas, which is actually just about 45 minutes of where we are in the Wichita area. Okay. So it's it's not far away from where we are. I have no allusion to this being the first usage of it, but here's what they were doing. So there was an article talking about the 1884 Prohibition National Convention that was held in Pennsylvania. The Prohibition Party was a political party that was effectively a temperance movement, meaning anti-alcohol. In the newspaper, it mentions how Kansas Governor John St. John was nominated for the presidency. And here is the title and the opening sentence. Quote, "Can't cut the mustard. The Prohibition Convention at Pittsburgh last week nominated St. John for president. Notwithstanding, he declared he did not want it. End quote.
Nice.
Uh, now, I'm fairly certain that there were no presidents that were ever elected from the Prohibition Party. It kind of started to die out a little bit after Prohibition became the law of the land in the United States, and then by the end of World War I, it pretty much just died out. Okay, so next up are a pair of entries in 1886, and I'm going to use both of them here because they help us understand the way the phrase was being used. This one is from a gossip column in the Lexington Weekly Intelligencer out of Missouri, dated March 13th, 1886. Gossip columns were simply Facebook posts, basically. They were just Twitter, or Blue Sky or Threads, where you're just posting something about what's going on your day. There's oftentimes no other context to it. The point is that your readers will understand that if I post it on Facebook, then my family sees that or my friends see that, and they have all the context they need, but someone looking from the outside is like, what? I don't understand what that means. So it's just kind of an update on what's going on.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Quote, Sam went to see Miss Molly last Sunday evening, and as the butter and biscuit had been given out, Sam did not stay long. Sam, you could not cut the mustard. End quote.
Okay.
I feel bad for folks who had their business put on display in the local newspaper's gossip columns, because
Right?
Sam certainly didn't try and put that in the paper, right?
Yeah.
And at least these days you can report a post and have it taken down, right? So poor Sam, not able to make it work here with Ms. Molly, has no recourse. Even if the paper issued a retraction, which they probably wouldn't do for this section, then it still existed.
Right. Yeah.
So, not that we don't have misinformation and malinformation happening all the time, but there are some methods that we can use to at least have it removed if it's not a big deal. Although obviously, if you're popular or famous, then there's nothing. You're not removing it from the internet.
Yeah.
All right, so there's that one. And here is another example from the same year in the Butler Weekly Times, also out of Missouri. And this one is April 7th, 1886. Quote, can't cut the mustard is what our good brother Wade of the Butler Democrat calls getting left on a post office. This jargon of a political juggler shall not divert our attention from the main issue, which is that Wade's days as a boss in Bates are numbered, and we will wager him a ton of Henry County coal against a half dozen lots in Walnut and 3 or 4 of his last year's railroads that he can't deliver the goods, either directly or indirectly. End quote.
Okay.
I like this example because it shows there's two things that are in quotation here. There's the first in quotes, can't cut the mustard, right? And then later at the end in quotations, can't deliver the goods, which those two things being in quotations are both showing that they are, in this case, they're related. And we're saying he can't cut the mustard, which means he can't deliver the goods. He can't do what he says he's going to be able to do. So I think that's really interesting. I also think the Butler Democrat, that's the Democrat, is actually what that was, but that's not an unintentional error, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. It was.
So now getting left on a post office, I don't know what that means. I assume it means they're unable to do what they're supposed to be doing, but I could not find any evidence of that phrase otherwise. So, but I did not spend a whole lot of time on it either.
Do you think that's kind of like being left on red?
No, I think it is being. I immediately went to that, but no, I think it is probably more unable to be delivered or unable to deliver on, so unable to complete your job. So it got left at the post office, that kind of thing. I think that's where it went because he says it means the same thing as can't cut the mustard. So
Yeah.
All right, here's one from the Barton County Democrat out of Kansas, dated November 7th, 1889. This is a headline in the newspaper talking about election victories for the Democrats. Quote, mudslinging don't win, but honest, efficient officers and a clean campaign cuts the mustard. End quote. So this one is interesting for two reasons. One, it is being used in the positive. A clean campaign cuts the mustard, right? So I like that. But the other piece that I think is interesting, and this is really about all four of these, right? All four of these are from roughly the same time frame, 1884 to 1889, and they are all in heavily farmland area. Right. So now the one thing I would say is that mustard grows in a little bit cooler climates. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were able to grow it in parts of Missouri and Kansas and up into like Iowa and Indiana, Illinois, those areas. So that wouldn't surprise me a lot if they were able to grow it there. So it would be something that might make more sense in the heartland of America, where
Right.
I'm not saying that's where the phrase comes from. We don't necessarily have evidence for that, but I did all of the early late 1880s, mid to late 1880s examples I found were from states that are still today known for farming. All right, this next one also uses it in the positive. This is from the Madison Courier out of Indiana, and it's dated March 24th, 1900. This piece follows horse racing and talks about what has happened recently with sales, purchases, practices, and the like. Quote, Doc Cheatham will be at the park with a string about the 1st of April. He will have Lewis Richardson's Dr. Curtis. This colt ought to be able to cut the mustard this fall. End quote. In this case, cut the mustard is in quotes, so they are making a point that this is not literally that he's going to go cut mustard, but that he should be able to do what he needs to do, this thoroughbred.
Yeah.
This next one seems to be frequently cited as the origin of the phrase, and I honestly wasn't going to include it originally, but I feel like because it gets cited by every internet sleuth, that this really needs to be something that I just bring up. So we have obviously seen the phrase for over 20, 30 years at this point, before this book was published. But this book is The Heart of the West by O. Henry. I don't know what the O stands for. Published in 1904. Here's the section that uses the phrase, quote, by nature and doctrines, I am addicted to the habit of discovering choice places wherein to feed. So I looked around and found a proposition that exactly cut the mustard, end quote.
Nice.
I think that one is also dual play as a dual pun in that case, because this whole paragraph, this whole part is talking about finding a place to get food, going into a restaurant.
Mm-hmm. I think that one's really interesting. Yeah, well, and O. Henry is one of those, like, kind of known, like a more well-known thing, and so I could see where sometimes people want to associate an origin for a phrase with something they know or that's familiar,
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure, if you don't have access to newspaper archives, then, maybe this was the first attestation at one point. But unfortunately, most of the places on the internet, and this is why we go with either like the Oxford English Dictionary, who is an academic dictionary, or we go with actual citations and quotes and research from others in the industry, in the field, that are doing things, because we can piece things together all we want, but we are not linguists. We are researchers. So our goal is to make sure we can back up everything we say with evidence, which is not always, most things are not cited on the internet.
Right.
which makes it really, then they just circle and cycle, and somebody sees it on this website and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I'll just say that because that's what this says. And no,
they'll too easily trust it, and then they just are perpetuating the issue.
That's exactly it. It's like that time frame when, like, I grew up in a time frame where my parents were like, stranger danger, don't get in the car, don't trust other people. If you don't know who they are, you need to keep clear, be very wary of them, right? But now I live in a time frame when my parents will be on the internet and literally trust anything that is written down. They will believe anything they see posted on Facebook or on that comes into their email inbox, and I'm like, what happened? How did this go wrong?
Right. I know.
It's wild. They're not the only ones, obviously.
Yeah.
Lots of people do that, but all right, this next one is out of the Ledge, which bills itself as the oldest mining newspaper in British Columbia. This is out of Canada and is dated January 15th, 1914. Quote, in the rattle of life's battle, we resort to forces queer, but the force of all the forces is caloric atmosphere. For it's air that fans our faces, and it's wing that stirs the crowd, as we struggle for the pesos, from the bibbin to the shroud. One may emulate a bishop, have his piety as well, have his head so full of wisdom as the almost burst the shell, have the knowledge of a master and a double-joined pool, but he cannot cut the mustard if he cannot throw the bull. End quote.
Nice.
I like
You liked this one because it rhymed, huh?
That's yes, very very good. Yes, very true. Yeah. Also, it's an example out of Canada, our neighbors to the north, and that is I like trying to find examples from other places and other countries,
Yeah.
especially since the Oxford English Dictionary notes that this is chiefly of U.S. origin, and since the idiom comes from here, I like finding examples when it has spread to other newspapers in other countries. Here's an example of the phrase in a dictionary from 1927. This is from American Speech, Volume 2, edited by Louise Pound, Kemp Malone, and Arthur Kennedy. In it, they give the phrase, define it, and then use it in a sentence. Quote, cut the mustard, verb phrase, to be unable to perform an assigned task, always used negatively. The boys could not cut the mustard in that game. End quote. Now, this one notes the phrase is always used negatively, though I think we've seen plenty of examples to show that isn't always the case before this, and it won't be the case after this either. Here's an account from the United States House of Representatives in a conversation about the Farm Credit legislation, which was dated March 21st, 1940. In it, Albert Goss, the former land bank manager, is testifying to the House Committee on Agriculture. In this snippet, he is asked a question by Representative Fred Cummings of Colorado. Quote, Mr. Cummings, if a man gets a loan and over a period of years he has demonstrated that he cannot cut the mustard, how is he going to demonstrate it in a period of 12 months? There might be better crops, better prices than he had when he reached that point. How are you going to build him over in 12 months? Mr. Goss, as a matter of fact, in a 12-year period, he has demonstrated that he could not cut the mustard. End quote.
Okay.
Now, this is interesting because when Representative Cummings used the phrase, it was not in quotations. However, when Mr. Goss used the phrase, it was in quotations. And this tells me that likely the recorder was unsure if it was meant literally by Representative Cummings, who was a farmer and a rancher, in that he was talking about mustard crops, potentially. But the recorder was certain that Mr. Goss was using the phrase figuratively, meaning unable to perform. So I think that's a really interesting use of this because I'm not sure the way Mr. Cummings meant it, but he could have meant it literally. These could have been mustard crops. But it was clear that Mr. Goss was using this figuratively.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And there's a whole backstory on this. Albert Goss, the land bank, who's the former land bank commissioner, because he had literally resigned days before this. And there was this whole big ordeal that he just did not want to be a part of, and so he ended up resigning, and there were a lot of other people that had to testify in this whole political scandal. But the scandal itself is neither here nor there, but it gives you a little idea that Mr. Goss had recently resigned from this position. So, because he didn't want any part in what was done without his knowledge, the things that were done were behind his back, and he was not consulted on it, even though he should have been. And so he's like, this is someone else's bed, and I am not going to sleep in it.
All right.
Well, with that, it's time to move to our more modern uses. But first, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork, once a month, made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
We will start off the modern uses right where we left off before the break. Too Old to Cut the Mustard is a 1950 song by the Carlyles. It was released in 1951 by Ernest Tubb and Red Foley in a country and western style, which is how it was originally written, and then in 1952 by Rosemary Clooney and Marlene Dietrich in a jazzy pop standard style. The version by Clooney and Dietrich, the chorus is the same, but the verses are different to fit their style and the fact that it's two women singing it. Two very popular, massively popular women during that time frame. And in fact, their version charted much higher than any of the other versions ever did.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
So here's the first verse and the chorus from the Tubb and Foley version. Quote, "When I was young, I had a lot of pep. I could get around, didn't need no help. But now you're getting old and getting gray. The people all look at you and say, too old, too old. He's too old to cut the mustard anymore. He's getting too old. He's done got too old. He's too old to cut the mustard anymore." End quote.
Nice.
Pep and help rhyme in this particular version because you're a whole lot of pep, didn't need no hip.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how they said it. It feels weird to me to drop the L in that, since that's a little bit more country than my vernacular ever was, despite growing up with a very pronounced drawl that I occasionally comes out.
Yeah. Funny.
Cutting the Mustard, Affirmative Action, and the Nature of Excellence is a 1987 nonfiction book by Marjorie Hines. It is published in the genre of law material, and according to the publisher, it is about, quote, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution and its relationship to affirmative action and sexism, end quote. That sounds like a fascinating read for someone who isn't me, probably a lawyer or someone studying law. Cut the Mustard is a 1998 song written by Shel Silverstein and performed by Mel Tillis with the group Old Dogs. Old Dogs was a kind of a super group of performers that maybe were past their prime. It consisted of Mel Tillis, Jerry Reed, Waylon Jennings, and Bobby Bare. If you are a fan of country and western music or old country music or even outlaw country music, you will recognize some of those names. Here are some of the lyrics. Quote, I said, now I don't want to hurt your pride. Your cooking is known far and wide, but I'm expected home for dinner, so I must decline. Wonder why you must decline. But Dolly yelled, what's the matter, Buster? Are you too old to cut the mustard? I turned my silver head and replied, no, I ain't too old to cut the mustard. I'm just too tired to spread it around. So I gotta turn you and your barbecue down, down, down. So leave me alone. I'm going on home to the best home cooking in town. I ain't too old to cut the mustard, just too tired to spread it around. End quote.
Awesome.
Yeah. The whole song is basically them singing to the ladies in the audience about why they shouldn't throw up their under things or their motel keys or, whatever, because they're like, yeah, we're going home. We're we're not too old to cut the mustard, which is a euphemism for sex, but we're too old to spread it around.
That's funny.
Yeah. Cuttin' to Mustard is a 2008 comedy movie. Here's the synopsis from their trailer, quote, aspiring actor Rollo feels misunderstood when he reenacts a classic monologue from Menace to Society at a Shakespearean acting class. So he enrolls at the smaller Queen's Theatre Company. There he meets a mixed bag of dreamers, all confident they've got what it takes to make it in show business, including his best friend Patrick and a Noriokan hottie named Irma. When the company's director leaves for a sitcom gig, Rollo is asked to take over and keep everyone's dream alive. But before he can do this, he must overcome some very serious personal obstacles and prove he has what it takes to cut the mustard. End quote. The
Okay.
serious obstacles, this is not a spoiler, it's in the trailer, is that he cannot read, which is why he did a
Ah.
monologue from Menace to Society instead of Shakespeare. Because he can't read. So
Okay.
yeah, that is one of the personal obstacles, very serious personal obstacles that he has to overcome. There are clearly others. So
Wow.
you
Okay.
can find the link to it on the show notes or on our Patreon. Murder Cuts the Mustard is a 2019 cozy mystery book by Jessica Ellicott and is part of her A Beryl and Edwina mystery series. Here's the synopsis from Penguin Random House, the publisher. Quote, in the lean years following World War I, brash American adventuress Beryl Helliwell and prim and proper Brit Edwina Davenport form a private inquiry agency to make ends meet, hoping that crime does indeed pay. The latest occurrence to disturb the peace in the quaint English village of Walmsley Parva hits rather too close to home. In fact, the prime suspect has taken up residence in Edwina's potty shed. Her elderly gardener, Simpkins, has been secretly sleeping there after a row with his disreputable brother-in-law and housemate, Hector Lomax. When Hector is found murdered in the local churchyard, Constable Gibbs comes looking for Simpkins, who was last seen arguing with his kin in the pub the night before. Based on the sad state of her garden, Edwina has grave doubts that the shiftless Simpkins could muster the effort to murder anyone. The two sleuths throw themselves into weeding out suspects and rooting out the real killer. But this is no garden variety murder. The discovery of a valuable ring, a surprise connection to Colonel Kimberly's condiment company, and a second homicide all force Beryl and Edwina to play catch up as they relish the chance to contain the culprit. End quote. All right.
Okay.
So many puns to Murder Cuts the Mustard in this. Oh my.
That's very fun.
Yeah, I think it gives you an idea. I love it when a synopsis really gives me a feel for what I think the book is about or how the book is written. I love it
Yeah.
when the synopsis is actually like written in the same style as the author's writing.
Right.
All right. Last one, Cut the Mustard is a limited edition photography artwork by Nathan Myhrvold. It features a mustard bottle exploding out of the top at a nondescript fast food container of fries. Here is the description from the Modernist Cuisine Gallery by Nathan Myhrvold website. Quote, mustard first met the hot dog at the 1904 World's Fair. Its popularity has been exploding ever since. In Belgium and France, the ancestral home of French fries, mustard is the preferred condiment, not ketchup. Nathan couldn't choose just one, so he created Cut the Mustard as a companion piece to Don't Whack the Bottle. End quote. I assume Don't Whack the Bottle, I didn't see it, but I assume that one is a ketchup-based photography piece, and this one is obviously mustard-based.
Fun.
Yeah. You can see an image of it on the Patreon. Well, I actually like this phrase, despite feeling it's a bit silly. It makes me laugh because anytime someone uses the phrase cut the mustard, it makes me think of a 1981 Grey Poupon mustard commercial in which a fancy guy is sitting in the back of his car, eating a full meal, when another car pulls up to him and says, pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon? And the fancy guy goes, but of course, and hands him the container through the window. It's
Uh,
such an absurdist take, and the whole commercial feels super outdated, but it was fun to watch. And I feel the same way about this phrase. It feels almost silly or absurd to say, but just like grape upon mustard, I really like it for some reason. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
it's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, what is your favorite drinking water? First place was home filtered water, followed by no preference, then spring or glacier water, and then sparkling water. Mineral water did not seem to appeal to our patrons, nor did alkaline water. Heather said, quote, I'm not picky about plain water and mostly drink tap, but I recently started drinking flavored water. There are a bunch of brands, but I really like Bai. It refreshes me when I would otherwise reach for a soda. End quote. I like that one as well.
Which one?
The Bai,
Oh.
if I'm going to do a flavored water, although, I mean, I generally just do the home filtered water, refill my bottle before I leave. A couple of bottles. Actually, I take 2 of them with me to work every
Oh,
day.
wow.
And yeah, I drink a lot of water.
Well, Emily added, quote, when at home, I drink filtered tap water. When traveling in the U.S., I drink bottled water because the water in some places upsets my stomach, end quote. She notes she's not sure what it is the pH, the minerals, whatever, she doesn't know, but sometimes it upsets her stomach. Personally, I'm fine with the tap water most of the time, too. I have a filter in the fridge, and I think that water tastes better, and it's also cold, and I don't like to put ice in my water. I don't mind it being cold, but I'll drink it at room temperature, too. It doesn't bother me at all. So at home, I usually do that. I just drink it right out of the fridge, little piece. But I also like most brands of bottled water. I do strongly dislike mineral water, as it leaves me feeling thirsty even after I drink it. It makes me feel like Tantalus.
Nice. I love the mineral water. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid, and patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.